On a warm afternoon, Maya Carter, a respected FBI agent, decided to take a break from her demanding job. She loved spending time in the park, where the fresh air and the peaceful surroundings gave her a rare moment to relax. Maya wasn't just any agent. She was known for her sharp instincts, calm demeanor, and ability to handle the toughest cases. That day, she sat quietly on a wooden bench, reading a book she'd been meaning to finish for weeks. Dressed in her neatly pressed uniform, with her badge clipped to her belt, Maya looked like someone who had earned her place in the world through hard work and determination. Not far away, Officer Greg Harding was patrolling the same park. Greg was known among his colleagues for his short temper and quick judgments. He prided himself on being tough on crime, but often let his personal biases cloud his judgment. As he walked through the park, his eyes landed on Maya. At first glance, she didn't stand out much, just a woman reading a book on a bench. But something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was her calm confidence, or the way she didn't seem to notice him. Whatever it was, Greg decided he needed to investigate. Greg approached Maya, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel path. Standing tall in his uniform, he projected an air of authority that often made people uneasy. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharp and demanding. Maya looked up, slightly surprised but not alarmed. She had encountered officers like him before, men who wore their badges as symbols of power rather than service. "Yes, officer. How can I help you?" Maya replied, her tone polite but firm. Greg narrowed his eyes, already forming assumptions. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Maya raised her eyebrows, holding up her book. "Reading," she said simply. Greg wasn't satisfied. Something about her calmness irritated him. "Do you have any identification?" he asked, his voice growing harsher. Maya reached for her badge, clipped to her belt, and handed it to him. "I'm Special Agent Maya Carter, FBI," she said. Her tone was steady, but there was a hint of weariness. She had dealt with situations like this before, where her credentials weren't taken at face value. Greg took the badge, examining it closely. But instead of accepting it, he frowned. "This doesn't look real to me," he said, shaking his head. Maya's patience was starting to wear thin. "It's real," she said, keeping her voice calm. "You can call my office to verify." But Greg wasn't interested in verifying anything. In his mind, Maya didn't belong in the park, sitting there so confidently. He didn't trust her badge, her words, or her calm demeanor. To him, she was a threat that needed to be dealt with. The exchange quickly escalated. Greg began accusing Maya of loitering, trespassing, and even impersonating a federal agent. Maya, knowing her rights and her responsibilities as an FBI agent, tried to de-escalate the situation. She explained her role, her badge, and even offered to provide the contact information for her office. But Greg wasn't listening. His voice grew louder, drawing the attention of people nearby. A small crowd started to gather. People pulled out their phones, recording the interaction. Some whispered among themselves, wondering why a police officer was harassing a woman who had clearly identified herself as an FBI agent. Others watched in silence, their eyes filled with curiosity and concern. Despite the growing audience, Greg didn't back down. He saw Maya's calmness as defiance, and it only fueled his anger. Finally, he made a decision that would change both of their lives. "Stand up," he barked, pulling out his handcuffs. Maya looked at him, disbelief flashing across her face. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong," she said. Greg didn't care. "I said stand up," he repeated, louder this time. Maya knew arguing would only make things worse. Slowly, she stood, her heart heavy with frustration and humiliation. As Greg cuffed her hands behind her back, she looked out at the crowd. She saw the shock and anger on their faces, and for a moment, she felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on her. As Greg led her toward his patrol car, the crowd began to murmur louder. Some shouted questions, others words of support for Maya. But she stayed silent, her mind racing. She knew this wasn't just about her. This moment was bigger than one person, one misunderstanding, or one bad cop. Maya Carter had faced challenges before, but this time, she was determined to turn this moment of humiliation into something much greater. What Greg didn't realize was that Maya wasn't just any FBI agent. She was a fighter, someone who knew how to stand up against injustice, not with anger, but with strategy, grace, and unshakable determination. And as the patrol car doors closed behind her, she knew exactly what her next move would be. At the police station, the atmosphere was tense. Officer Greg Harding walked in with Maya Carter in handcuffs, his chest puffed with self-importance. The other officers glanced up from their desks, their curiosity piqued. It wasn't every day that someone was brought in who claimed to be an FBI agent. Some looked skeptical, others confused. But Greg strode in as though he had just made the arrest of the year. Maya, however, remained calm. She knew there was no point in creating a scene or raising her voice. Her experience as an FBI agent had taught her that the truth always came to light. Still, the weight of the situation wasn't lost on her. The humiliation of being walked through a police station in handcuffs, treated like a criminal despite her credentials, stung deeply. She held her head high, refusing to let anyone see her frustration. Greg led her to an empty interrogation room and motioned for her to sit down. "We'll sort this out soon enough," he muttered with a tone that suggested he still didn't believe her. Maya said nothing, watching him closely as he fumbled with some paperwork. He seemed nervous, as though a part of him realized he might have made a mistake, but was too stubborn to admit it. Minutes later, another officer entered the room. He was older, with a calm demeanor that suggested years of experience. "What's going on here, Harding?" he asked, looking from Greg to Maya. Greg straightened up. "She's claiming to be an FBI agent, but her badge looks fake. I caught her acting suspicious in the park." The older officer frowned and turned to Maya. "Ma'am, may I see your badge?" Maya nodded, gesturing toward the desk where Greg had placed it. "It's right there. Feel free to call my office to verify my credentials," she said, her voice steady but firm. The officer picked up the badge and examined it closely. Unlike Greg, he didn't jump to conclusions. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "This looks legitimate to me. Harding, did you verify this with her office?" Greg hesitated, his confidence faltering for the first time. I didn't think it was necessary," he said, his tone defensive. The older officer gave him a sharp look. "That's standard procedure. You should have verified it before bringing her in." Turning to Maya, the officer said, "I'm very sorry for this inconvenience, Agent Carter. Let me make a call to clear this up immediately." Greg shifted uncomfortably as the older officer left the room to make the call. Maya could see the cracks in his bravado, but she didn't gloat. Instead, she remained silent, her eyes focused on the door. She knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. When the officer returned, his expression was serious. "Agent Carter, I've spoken with your office. Everything checks out. You're free to go, and I sincerely apologize for the way you've been treated." Greg's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The older officer turned to him, his voice stern. "Harding, I need to see you in my office. Now." Maya stood, rubbing her wrists where the cuffs had left red marks. "I appreciate your apology," she said, her tone polite but firm. "However, this isn't something I can just brush off. I was humiliated and treated like a criminal because of assumptions and poor judgment. This kind of behavior needs to be addressed." The older officer nodded. "You're absolutely right, and I assure you, this matter will be taken very seriously." As Maya left the station, her thoughts were racing. The incident wasn't just about her. It was about a larger issue. How many others had been treated unfairly like this, but didn't have the credentials or the platform to fight back? Maya had spent her career upholding justice, and she knew she couldn't let this slide. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. News of the arrest had spread quickly, and reporters were already waiting with cameras and microphones. Maya stopped for a moment, her composure as steady as ever. She could see the curiosity in their eyes, the hunger for a story. But Maya wasn't just going to give them a headline. She was going to give them the truth. She stepped forward, addressing the cameras directly. "I am Special Agent Maya Carter with the FBI. Earlier today, I was wrongfully detained by a police officer who made assumptions based on prejudice rather than facts. This is not just about me. This is about accountability, fairness, and the need for change. I'm committed to ensuring that incidents like this don't happen again, not to me or anyone else." Her words were powerful, and the crowd hung on every syllable. Maya wasn't just a victim. She was a voice for justice, a beacon of strength in the face of adversity. As she walked away, she knew her fight wasn't over. The real work was just beginning. The news of Maya Carter's arrest spread like wildfire. By the next morning, videos from the park had gone viral on social media, showing every moment of the confrontation. In the clips, Maya was calm and composed, while Officer Greg Harding was aggressive and unprofessional. The stark contrast between the two stirred outrage among viewers. People from all walks of life were sharing the video, tagging it with words like injustice, racism, and accountability. Maya woke up to dozens of missed calls and messages. Some were from her colleagues at the FBI, offering support, while others were from journalists requesting interviews. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages from strangers, some expressing anger on her behalf, others sharing similar stories of being mistreated. Maya felt a wave of emotions as she scrolled through the messages. She was touched by the support, but the sheer number of people with similar experiences made her heart ache. Later that morning, Maya's phone buzzed again. It was her supervisor, Assistant Director Thomas Bradley, a no-nonsense man who had always been in her corner. "Maya," he said, his voice steady but serious, "I saw the video. I want you to know the FBI stands with you. What happened yesterday was unacceptable, and we will support you in any action you choose to take." Maya appreciated the call. It gave her a sense of validation, but she also knew this wasn't just about her. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "I'm glad to have your support, but this is bigger than me. We need to address why things like this keep happening." Thomas paused for a moment, then said, "If anyone can turn this into something meaningful, it's you. Let me know how I can help." Maya spent the rest of the day thinking about her next steps. She could have easily let the incident fade into the background, relying on the FBI's apology and her own reputation to smooth things over. But deep down, she knew she couldn't do that. Too many people didn't have the resources or the platform she had. Too many people were silenced or ignored. Maya wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of prejudice. By the afternoon, she made her decision. She called her lawyer, a sharp and experienced woman named Elena Rodriguez. "Elena," Maya said, her voice firm, "I want to file a formal complaint against Officer Harding and the police department. But more than that, I want to use this moment to push for change." Elena didn't hesitate. "I'll start drafting the paperwork," she said. "And if you're ready to take this public, I'll help you navigate that too." Maya nodded, even though Elena couldn't see her. "Let's do it," she said. As the day went on, Maya began reaching out to community leaders, activists, and even journalists. She wanted to make sure the story wasn't just about her, but about the larger issue of systemic bias in law enforcement. She gave her first interview to a local news station that evening. Sitting across from the reporter, Maya told her story in simple, heartfelt words. "This isn't just about what happened to me," she said. "This is about a pattern of behavior that needs to change. I'm lucky. I have a platform, and I have people who will listen to me. But what about those who don't? What about the people who go through this every day and have no one to speak for them? That's why I'm here. That's why I'm speaking out." The interview aired that night, and it struck a chord with viewers. Maya wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter, someone who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. Her words were shared widely, and soon national news outlets were picking up the story. Maya's calm yet determined voice became a symbol of resilience, and people from across the country began rallying behind her. Meanwhile, the pressure on the local police department was mounting. Officer Harding was placed on suspension pending an investigation. But for many, that wasn't enough. Activists organized protests outside the police station, demanding accountability and transparency. Signs reading "Justice for Maya" and "End Police Bias" filled the streets. Maya watched the protests from a distance, humbled by the support, but also aware of the responsibility that came with it. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a cause much larger than her own experience. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for the challenge. That night, as she sat at her desk drafting a statement for an upcoming press conference, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just an FBI agent anymore. She was an advocate, a voice for those who couldn't speak up. And as she typed the last words of her statement, she knew she was exactly where she needed to be. The press conference was packed. Reporters filled the room, cameras clicked constantly, and microphones were lined up on the podium. Maya Carter stood backstage, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She had faced dangerous situations before as an FBI agent, but this felt different. This wasn't about catching criminals or solving a case. This was about confronting something much deeper: prejudice, bias, and a broken system that needed change. When Maya stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Her calm and composed demeanor commanded attention. She was dressed in a professional suit, her FBI badge pinned to her belt. Maya looked at the crowd for a moment before she spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Good afternoon," she began. "As most of you know, I am Special Agent Maya Carter with the FBI. A few days ago, I was wrongfully detained by a police officer who made assumptions about me based on bias rather than facts. That moment was humiliating, frustrating, and deeply disappointing. But I'm not here to talk just about what happened to me. I'm here to talk about what this moment represents." Maya paused, letting her words sink in. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a much larger problem. A system that allows bias to dictate decisions, a culture where power is often misused, and a society where people are judged unfairly because of the way they look, where they come from, or who they are. I was lucky. I had my badge and my position to back me up. But what about those who don't? The audience was captivated. Reporters furiously took notes, and the camera zoomed in on Maya's face as she continued. "I'm not here to point fingers or create division. I'm here to demand accountability, fairness, and change. It's time we hold ourselves and our institutions to a higher standard. Law enforcement should protect and serve everyone equally, without prejudice. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us." As she spoke, people watching the press conference online began flooding social media with messages of support. Maya's words resonated deeply, not just with those who had experienced similar injustices, but also with people who were simply tired of the system failing those it was meant to protect. After the press conference, Maya stayed behind to answer a few questions from reporters. One journalist asked, "Agent Carter, what changes would you like to see in the system?" Maya didn't hesitate. "I'd like to see mandatory bias training for all law enforcement officers. I'd like to see stronger accountability measures, so officers who misuse their power are held responsible. And I'd like to see more open communication between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Trust has to be rebuilt, and that starts with transparency and accountability." Another reporter asked, "How do you feel about the public support you've received?" Maya smiled faintly. "I'm incredibly grateful for the support, but this isn't about me. It's about creating a system where no one has to go through what I did. The real work starts now, and it's going to take all of us working together to make that happen." As Maya left the press conference, she felt a mix of emotions. She was proud of herself for speaking out, but she knew this was just the beginning. The press conference had brought attention to the issue, but real change would require action, policy changes, community engagement, and a willingness from everyone involved to do better. Over the next few weeks, Maya worked tirelessly. She partnered with community leaders, civil rights organizations, and even other law enforcement agencies to push for reform. Together, they organized town hall meetings where people could share their experiences and voice their concerns. Maya listened carefully, taking notes and learning from every story. She realized that while her experience was unique, the underlying issues were all too common. Meanwhile, the police department where Greg Harding worked was facing intense scrutiny. Activists continued to protest outside the station, demanding answers and accountability. The department announced an internal investigation, and Greg was placed on indefinite leave. But for many, that wasn't enough. They wanted real, systemic changes, not just temporary fixes. Maya decided to meet with the police chief, a woman named Laura Martinez, who had a reputation for being fair but firm. The meeting was tense at first, but Maya spoke with the same calm determination that had won over so many people. "Chief Martinez," she said, "this isn't about blaming one officer. It's about fixing the system that allows these incidents to happen in the first place. I'm here to work with you, not against you. But we need to take action, real action." The police chief listened carefully, nodding as Maya spoke. By the end of the meeting, the two women had reached an agreement to collaborate on a series of reforms, including better training for officers and the establishment of an independent oversight committee to handle complaints of misconduct. As word of their collaboration spread, public opinion began to shift. People were encouraged to see someone from law enforcement and someone from the FBI working together for change. Maya became a symbol of hope and resilience, proving that even in the face of injustice, it was possible to fight for what was right without losing sight of the bigger picture. Despite the progress, Maya knew there was still a long way to go. But she was ready for the challenge. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a step toward a fairer, more just system. And Maya was determined to keep walking that path, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been denied justice. The collaboration between Maya Carter and Chief Laura Martinez began to take shape in meaningful ways. It wasn't just about meetings and promises, it was about action. Maya spent hours reviewing the police department's existing protocols, identifying areas that needed improvement. She worked closely with Chief Martinez and her team to develop a series of reforms aimed at creating a more fair and accountable system. The first step was implementing mandatory bias training for all officers. Maya believed that education was a powerful tool for change. She brought in experts to conduct workshops and sessions, ensuring that officers not only understood their biases, but also learned how to counteract them in the field. These sessions were designed to be interactive and thought-provoking, encouraging officers to reflect on their own behaviors and attitudes. At first, there was resistance. Some officers rolled their eyes during the sessions, while others openly voiced their skepticism. "What's the point of this?" one officer muttered during a workshop. "I've been doing my job just fine for years." Maya, who was observing the session, stepped forward. "The point," she said calmly, "is to ensure that everyone, no matter who they are, is treated with respect and fairness. It's not about pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about learning and growing, both as individuals and as a team. And as someone who's dedicated her life to upholding the law, I can tell you that this work is just as important as any arrest you'll ever make." Her words struck a chord with many of the officers. While not everyone was immediately convinced, the seeds of change had been planted. Over time, some officers began to see the value in the training. They started asking questions, engaging in discussions, and even sharing their own experiences. It wasn't a perfect process, but it was progress. Meanwhile, Maya continued to engage with the community. She attended town hall meetings, listened to stories of people who had been mistreated by law enforcement, and worked to build bridges between the police department and the public. One of the most impactful moments came during a meeting where a young man named Jamal stood up to speak. Jamal, who was only 18, shared a story about being stopped and frisked by the police multiple times while walking home from school. "I don't feel safe," he said, his voice trembling. I feel like I'm always being judged, like I'm guilty just for existing." The room fell silent as Jamal spoke. Maya felt a lump in her throat, but she remained composed. When he finished, she stood up and addressed him directly. "Jamal," she said, "thank you for sharing your story. What you've experienced is not okay, and it's exactly why we're here today. You deserve to feel safe in your own community, and I promise you, we're going to work to make that happen." Her words were met with applause, but Maya knew words alone weren't enough. She took Jamal's story back to Chief Martinez and used it as a catalyst for another reform, the introduction of body cameras for all officers. The goal was to increase transparency and accountability, ensuring that both officers and civilians were protected during interactions. The implementation of body cameras was met with mixed reactions. Some officers saw it as an invasion of their privacy, while others welcomed the change, believing it would help protect them from false accusations. Maya worked tirelessly to address these concerns, holding meetings with officers and explaining the importance of the cameras. Slowly but surely, the department began to adapt. As these changes unfolded, Maya's story continued to gain national attention. She was invited to speak at conferences, participate in panel discussions, and share her journey on television. But despite the growing spotlight, Maya remained focused on the work. She wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in results. One day, Maya received an unexpected call from a woman named Angela, who introduced herself as Greg Harding's sister. Angela was hesitant at first, but eventually, she opened up. "I wanted to apologize on behalf of my brother," she said. "What he did was wrong, and I know he's too proud to admit it. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in our family supports his actions." Maya was taken aback by the call but appreciated Angela's honesty. "Thank you for reaching out," Maya said. "I hope Greg takes this as an opportunity to reflect and grow. We all make mistakes, but what matters is how we choose to move forward." Greg Harding, meanwhile, was struggling with the fallout of his actions. Suspended from his job and publicly criticized, he began to reflect on what had led him to that moment. For the first time, he started to question his own biases and assumptions. It wasn't an easy process, but it was a necessary one. As weeks turned into months, the changes Maya and Chief Martinez had worked on began to show results. Complaints of misconduct in the department decreased, and trust between the police and the community slowly started to rebuild. Maya knew there was still a long way to go, but she felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, as Maya walked through the park where the incident had occurred, she saw a group of kids playing basketball. Jamal was among them, laughing and smiling. Maya stopped to watch for a moment, feeling a sense of pride. The road to justice was never easy, but moments like this reminded her why it was worth the fight. Months had passed since the day Maya Carter stood on that podium, speaking her truth and demanding change. Her work with Chief Laura Martinez had already started making a difference in the community and within the police department, but Maya knew this was just the beginning. Systemic reform took time, persistence, and unwavering dedication. Despite the progress, there were still pockets of resistance, people unwilling to change, systems reluctant to bend, and obstacles that made the road ahead anything but smooth. Maya spent most of her days juggling meetings, community outreach events, and policy discussions. Every day presented new challenges. Some officers remained skeptical of the reforms, seeing them as unnecessary scrutiny of their work. Others, however, began to open their minds, acknowledging the need for change. Maya made it a point to be accessible. She sat down with officers who had doubts, answering their questions, listening to their concerns, and sharing her perspective as both a law enforcement officer and someone who had experienced bias firsthand. One such conversation stood out. Officer Riley, a veteran with nearly 20 years on the force, approached Maya after a training session. He had been one of the more vocal critics of the reforms, often questioning the need for bias training and body cameras. But on this day, his tone was different. "Agent Carter," he began, his voice hesitant, "I wanted to thank you for what you said in that last session. It made me think about some things I've seen over the years, things I'd brushed off because I thought that was just how it was. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe we can do better." Maya smiled, her heart lifting at his words. "We can always do better, Officer Riley," she replied. "Acknowledging that is the first step. Change isn't easy, but it's worth it." Meanwhile, Maya continued to build relationships with community leaders. One of her closest allies was Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades and was known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. Mrs. Thompson had been a vocal critic of the police for years, but she saw something different in Maya. She saw someone who genuinely cared. During a community meeting, Mrs. Thompson stood up and addressed the room. "Now, I've been around long enough to know that promises don't mean much unless they're followed by action," she said, her voice steady and strong. "But I've been watching Agent Carter, and I see action. I see someone who's not just talking but doing. And for the first time in a long time, I feel a glimmer of hope." Her words were met with applause, and Maya felt a swell of gratitude. Moments like these reminded her why she was doing this work, but there were also moments of frustration. Not everyone in the community was as optimistic as Mrs. Thompson. Some people felt the changes were too slow, that progress wasn't coming fast enough. Maya understood their impatience. She shared it, but she also knew that real change took time. One evening, Maya received a call from Chief Martinez. The police department's internal investigation into Greg Harding had concluded, and the findings were being released to the public. Harding had been found guilty of misconduct and had been officially dismissed from the force. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. For some, it was a victory, a sign that accountability was possible. For others, it wasn't enough. They wanted to see broader systemic changes, not just individual punishments. Maya herself had mixed feelings. While she believed Harding's dismissal was the right decision, she also saw it as a reminder of how much work remained. Harding's actions had been a symptom of a larger problem, and addressing that problem required more than just removing one bad apple. In the midst of all this, Maya received an unexpected email. It was from Greg Harding himself. The message was brief but sincere. He apologized for his actions, admitting that he had let his biases cloud his judgment. He wrote about how the past few months had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his beliefs. Maya read the email twice, her emotions swirling. She appreciated his apology, but knew that words alone weren't enough. Still, the fact that Harding had taken this step gave her a sliver of hope. Change, she realized, wasn't just about policies and systems. It was also about individuals choosing to grow, to learn, and to do better. As the weeks went on, Maya's efforts continued to gain momentum. The town hall meetings grew larger, attracting people from all walks of life. Activists, police officers, teachers, parents, and even teenagers like Jamal came together to discuss solutions and share ideas. Maya made it a point to highlight the successes they had achieved, while also acknowledging the work that still needed to be done. One evening, after a particularly long day, Maya found herself back at the park where everything had started. She sat on the same bench, the memory of that humiliating day still fresh in her mind. But as she looked around, she saw something different. She saw kids playing, families walking their dogs, and officers patrolling the area, not with suspicion, but with smiles and friendly waves. A young girl approached Maya, holding a notebook and a pen. "Excuse me," the girl said shyly. "Are you Agent Carter?" Maya smiled. "I am. What's your name?" "Layla," the girl replied. "I just wanted to say thank you. My mom says you're really brave, and I want to be like you when I grow up." Maya's heart swelled with emotion. She signed the notebook and handed it back to Layla. "Thank you, Layla. And remember, you don't have to wait until you grow up to make a difference. You can start right now." As Layla ran off to join her friends, Maya sat back and watched the sun set over the park. The journey had been long, and it wasn't over yet. But in that moment, she felt a deep sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting for a future where every child, no matter who they were, could grow up feeling safe, valued, and free. The impact of Maya Carter's efforts had started to ripple across the community and beyond. The reforms she had pushed for, alongside Chief Laura Martinez, were slowly transforming the way law enforcement operated in the town. Relationships between officers and civilians were becoming more cordial, trust was being rebuilt, and people began to see the police not as adversaries, but as protectors. It was a shift Maya had hoped for, but deep down, she knew the fight wasn't over. One evening, Maya received an invitation to speak at a national conference on criminal justice reform. The event was to be attended by activists, legal experts, law enforcement officials, and policymakers from across the country. This was a chance for Maya to share her story and the work they had accomplished in the town, as well as inspire others to initiate change in their own communities. As she prepared her speech, Maya reflected on how far she had come since that fateful day in the park. It had started as a moment of humiliation and injustice, but had transformed into something powerful, a movement for accountability and fairness. She crafted her speech carefully, making sure it would resonate with people from all walks of life. She wanted them to understand that real change wasn't just a dream. It was possible, but it required courage, collaboration, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The day of the conference arrived, and Maya stood before a packed auditorium. The crowd was silent as she began to speak, recounting the events that had led her to this moment. She described the wrongful arrest, the biases she had faced, and the uphill battle to reform the system. But she also spoke of hope, of the officers who had embraced change, the community members who had stood by her side, and the young people like Jamal and Layla who represented the future. "I've learned," she said, her voice steady but passionate, "that change doesn't come from waiting for someone else to fix the problem. It comes from stepping forward, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, and saying, 'I will be the one to make a difference.' And when we do that, when we come together as a community, we can create something truly extraordinary." Her speech was met with a standing ovation. People approached her afterward, thanking her for her words and sharing their own stories of struggles and triumphs. Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just her fight. It was a collective effort, one that extended far beyond her small town. Back at home, life continued to evolve. The police department introduced more community policing initiatives, inviting residents to participate in ride-alongs and observe how officers worked. Transparency became a priority, with monthly reports on misconduct cases and disciplinary actions made public. While challenges remained, the culture within the department had started to shift. Officers like Riley, who had once been skeptical of the reforms, now championed them, encouraging their peers to embrace the changes. Maya's bond with Chief Martinez grew stronger as well. The two women, so different in their backgrounds and experiences, had found common ground in their shared commitment to justice. Together, they became a force for change, not just in their town, but as an example for other communities grappling with similar issues. One afternoon, Maya received a letter in the mail. It was from Greg Harding, the officer who had arrested her. This time, it wasn't just a short email, but a heartfelt, handwritten letter. In it, Harding detailed the personal journey he had been on since his dismissal. He wrote about attending counseling sessions, joining community workshops on racial equity, and volunteering at local shelters. "I didn't realize how much I needed to confront my own biases until I lost everything," Harding wrote. "It's a hard pill to swallow, but I want to be better, not just for myself, but for my family and for the people I hurt. I know I can't undo what I did to you, but I hope I can work toward earning back some measure of respect." Maya read the letter twice, feeling a mix of emotions. Forgiveness wasn't easy, and trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. But she saw in Harding's words a genuine desire to change, and that, she believed, was a step in the right direction. In the following weeks, Maya was surprised to see Harding at one of the town's community meetings. He sat quietly in the back, listening intently as people shared their experiences. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up and addressed the room with humility. "I used to think I was part of the solution," he said, "but I realize now that I was part of the problem. I'm here to learn, to listen, and to make amends." The room fell silent for a moment before Mrs. Thompson, the town's beloved elder, stood up and nodded. "It takes guts to admit when you're wrong," she said. "Now let's see what you're gonna do to make it right." That moment symbolized the essence of what Maya had been fighting for. Not just punishment for wrongdoing, but transformation, growth, and healing. It was proof that even those who had made mistakes could become allies in the fight for justice. As time went on, Maya continued her work, both locally and nationally. She became a mentor to young women aspiring to careers in law enforcement and advocacy, sharing her story and encouraging them to lead with integrity and compassion. She also stayed deeply connected to her community, attending block parties, visiting schools, and making sure that the bridges she had helped build remained strong. One evening, as Maya walked through the town square, she saw Leila, the little girl she had met in the park, now playing tag with her friends. Nearby, Jamal was helping set up a community barbecue, laughing as he worked alongside officers who had once seemed distant and unapproachable. Maya smiled, her heart full. The road to justice was never easy, and there was still so much to be done. But in that moment, surrounded by the laughter and camaraderie of her community, she knew they were on the right path. Together, they had turned pain into progress, fear into hope, and division into unity. And for Maya, that was everything.